I never thought her touch could feel so charged. My girlfriend's older sister had me pinned against the wall, and in that moment, everything changed. The day started like any other, or at least, that's what I told myself as I stepped into my girlfriend's apartment. The familiar smell of coffee and the faint undertone of lavender from her candles greeted me first, comforting yet routine. Then I saw her. Her sister. She wasn't trying to be intimidating, at least, not in any conscious way, but the moment she entered the room, it felt as if the air itself had changed. She moved with a quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need loud gestures or dramatic entrances. Her presence simply fills the space, the kind of presence that makes you notice even the smallest details. The way her hair caught the morning light, the subtle curve of her smile, the way she carried herself like she belonged to every room she entered. I felt a flutter in my chest that had nothing to do with nerves. I told myself I was just being polite, trying to hide my fascination. Still, when she passed by, her hand brushed my shoulder, lightly, almost as if by accident, but the touch lingered just a fraction too long. My skin prickled where it had touched hers, warm and fleeting, yet somehow leaving a trace I couldn't ignore. We exchanged a few words, casual enough on the surface, but her voice carried a weight I couldn't name. It was warm, calm, and familiar, yet there was a subtle edge to it, a depth that hinted at untold stories. I realized I was paying too much attention, memorizing the way she tilted her head when she listened, the soft furrow of her brow when she concentrated, the way her eyes seemed to scan past me, seeing something deeper. And then she laughed. It wasn't just any laugh. It was the kind that makes a room feel smaller and larger at the same time, that pulls you in without trying. I noticed how her shoulders moved, how her chest lifted with the sound, and stupidly, I found myself wanting to hear it again. I tried to look away, to focus on something else, anything else, but the pull of her presence was magnetic. I caught myself imagining what it would feel like to simply sit near her, close enough that our knees might brush. I shook my head, chiding myself for overthinking. She's my girlfriend's sister, I reminded myself, but even as I said it, I couldn't deny the quiet thrill that coursed through me at the thought of being near her, sharing the same air, exchanging the same fleeting glances. There was no overt flirtation, nothing reckless or intentional, just the spark of awareness, the subtle recognition that someone existed in a way that made everything else fade into the background for just a moment. And in that moment, I realized that today wasn't going to be ordinary after all. It started innocently enough. My girlfriend had asked for help setting up a few things for a small family dinner. I was crouched by the cabinet, fumbling with some utensils, when her sister appeared beside me. "Here, let me help you with that," she said, her voice calm but threaded with quiet authority. Her hand brushed mine as she reached over, and I felt a spark, small, fleeting, yet unmistakable. I froze for a moment, the subtle warmth of her fingers lingering against mine. It was the kind of touch that didn't demand attention, yet demanded it all the same. As we worked side by side, our shoulders brushed repeatedly. At first, I convinced myself it was coincidence. But the way she leaned just slightly closer than necessary, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the scent of olive oil and fresh bread, made it impossible to ignore. My heart thudded a little faster every time our knees accidentally touched under the table. I caught myself stealing glances at her profile, the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the soft curve of her jaw, the almost imperceptible tilt of her head when she focused. She spoke little, letting her actions carry the conversation. And somehow, in the quiet, I felt as though she was observing me, really seeing me, not just my hands fumbling with utensils, but me, my thoughts, my hesitations. There was an unspoken understanding forming between us, built on proximity and shared silence. When she laughed at my awkward attempt to balance a stack of plates, it was soft, knowing, and it drew me in closer despite my best intentions. I noticed how her hand lingered on the counter near mine, just enough that our fingers occasionally brushed. Each touch sent a small shock of awareness through me, electric and tender at once. Internally, I wrestled with my own thoughts. She's my girlfriend's sister, I reminded myself, yet the pull between us was undeniable. It wasn't reckless desire, it was something more subtle, more insistent: curiosity, admiration, and the strange intimacy that comes from working side by side, sharing small spaces, exchanging fleeting glances. By the time the task was finished, my chest felt tight, not from exertion, but from the closeness we'd shared. She smiled at me, a small, private smile, and my stomach twisted with anticipation I didn't yet understand. I caught her hand brushing against mine one last time as she moved past me, and I swear for a moment I felt her pulse. It was quiet after the dinner preparations. The younger sister had gone to fetch something from the car, leaving just the two of us in the kitchen. The clatter of utensils and the hum of the refrigerator were the only sounds, but the silence felt charged, as though waiting for someone to break it. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, and for the first time, she didn't have that aura of unshakable composure. Her eyes softened, and I noticed the faint lines at the corners, a map of experiences I could only imagine. "I've had better days," she admitted, almost in a whisper. Her voice wasn't dramatic, just quietly honest. I didn't respond immediately. I was too aware of the warmth radiating from her as she shifted closer, just enough that our arms brushed. Her confession hung in the air, and I realized I was the first person she'd said it to. Not a friend, not her sister, not anyone else, just me. Without thinking, I reached out, placing a hand gently on her forearm, feeling the subtle pulse beneath her skin. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand rest beneath mine for a moment. That small, almost accidental contact sent a ripple through me, a quiet, intimate connection that went beyond words. "I don't usually talk about this stuff," she continued, her voice steadier now. "But I guess you make it easy to talk." There was a softness in her gaze, an unguarded honesty that made my chest tighten. It was a side of her I hadn't seen before, the grace still there, but with a vulnerability that made her feel closer than ever. I listened, genuinely attentive, asking small, gentle questions, leaning slightly closer to hear her better. Our proximity was electric but subtle, the kind of closeness that makes you acutely aware of every movement. The way her hair brushed against her cheek, the way her shoulder pressed lightly against mine, the warmth that seemed to radiate from her without any effort. When she smiled, it was brief but meaningful, almost shy. My hand lingered, brushing her arm again, not daring to move away. I realized, in that quiet moment, that our connection wasn't about flirtation or impulsive attraction. It was something deeper, something that felt almost inevitable. It started with something trivial, a spilled glass of water, a dropped dish, a disagreement about how to arrange the chairs for the living room. Normally, these things wouldn't matter, but today, everything felt amplified. She sighed sharply, a sound that betrayed her usual composure, and I instinctively stepped closer to help. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, but the rhythm of my heartbeat had picked up. Without warning, she turned to me, eyes flashing with frustration and something else I couldn't name. In a single motion, she stepped forward, and suddenly I was backed against the wall. Not aggressively, not dangerously, just decisively, with an intensity that made my chest tighten. Her presence filled the space entirely. I could feel the heat radiating from her, the firmness of her stance, the subtle shift of her weight as she steadied herself. Our faces were inches apart, and I realized I could feel her breath, faintly scented with the same perfume I'd noticed days ago. Then she leaned in, pressing her lips against mine. It wasn't a playful or tentative kiss, it was firm, urgent, filled with emotion. I froze, surprised, but not unwilling. It was as if she were trying to communicate everything words couldn't: frustration, longing, admiration, a yearning for connection. I felt the subtle tremor of her hands on my shoulders, the grounding warmth of her body pressed lightly against mine. The kiss lingered just long enough for my mind to spin, but brief enough that it left more unsaid than spoken. When she finally stepped back, her cheeks were flushed, her gaze both intense and slightly embarrassed. We didn't speak immediately. Instead, there was a moment of suspended silence, where every tiny sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the clock, our shared breaths, felt amplified. I realized, with a mixture of awe and guilt, that this moment had changed something. It wasn't about impulsive desire. It was about a magnetic pull that neither of us could ignore. Her hands lingered near mine as she adjusted her sleeves, and I caught her glance briefly, eyes soft now, almost apologetic, yet still carrying the weight of everything unspoken. I stepped back, trying to make sense of the tension, aware that the lines between right and wrong, appropriate and irresistible, had blurred in the span of a heartbeat. For a while neither of us spoke. The room seemed unnaturally still, as though it was holding its breath right along with me. When she finally turned away, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, controlled, but the moment left a hollow space between us, full of unspoken words. I stayed leaning against the wall a second longer, trying to steady myself. My chest felt tight, not from fear but from everything that had just passed between us. I could still feel the warmth of her hands on my shoulders, the firmness of her lips, the nearness of her breath. It was burned into me now, something I couldn't pretend hadn't happened. When I finally moved, she was already busying herself at the counter, as though nothing had happened. Her movements were calm, almost graceful again, but her hands trembled slightly as she set down a dish. She caught me watching her and gave me a small, fleeting smile that was equal parts reassurance and apology. The rest of the evening felt strange. We kept a careful distance, but somehow every time I passed her in the hallway, my skin tingled. When our hands brushed as she handed me a glass, it was no longer an innocent accident, it was a reminder. My girlfriend returned and chatted casually, completely unaware of the storm beneath the surface. I couldn't focus on anything. My thoughts looped endlessly. What just happened? What does it mean? There was guilt, of course, guilt that twisted in my stomach every time I looked at my girlfriend. And yet there was also something else, a longing, a pull I couldn't deny. Later, as I was about to leave, she followed me to the door. The air between us felt heavy, charged. She didn't say much, just a soft, "Drive safe." But her hand brushed my arm as she said it, fingers curling for just a moment before she let go. That single touch felt like a secret promise and a warning all at once. Walking to my car, I felt the night air cool against my skin, grounding me, but not enough to quiet my thoughts. I knew I couldn't just ignore what had happened, but I also knew this wasn't something I could rush into. Whatever this was, it was complicated, fragile, and powerful. The following evening, she asked if we could talk, just the two of us. My heart thudded in a way I hadn't expected, a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. When I met her in the living room, she was sitting on the couch, arms crossed loosely but relaxed. The way she looked at me, calm yet searching, made me want to sit beside her, even though I was afraid of what it might mean. "I owe you an explanation," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but there was a softness underneath, a vulnerability she rarely let anyone see. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and sat down beside her close enough that our knees brushed. That single touch, almost accidental, felt grounding and electric. "I don't usually act like that," she admitted, glancing away for a fraction of a second before meeting my eyes again. "It wasn't fair to put you in that position." Her hand moved toward mine, hovering for a moment before she gently brushed her fingers against the back of my hand. The gesture was careful, respectful, yet intimate, as if she wanted to connect without overstepping. I took a slow breath. I get it," I said. "I've been feeling confused, I guess. But I also know we need boundaries." There was honesty in my voice, the kind that comes from wanting to protect both our hearts, while acknowledging the undeniable connection between us. She smiled faintly, a mix of relief and something deeper. "I don't regret the moment. I just wanted you to know that I respect you, and I don't want to hurt anyone." Her hand found mine again, this time letting our fingers interlace softly, the warmth of her skin reassuring me in ways words couldn't. We sat in silence for a few minutes, letting the gravity of our emotions settle around us. Our shoulders brushed lightly, a comforting reminder of closeness without pressure. I realized that this honesty, this careful connection, was more meaningful than any fleeting passion. It was real. She squeezed my hand gently before letting go, her eyes warm and thoughtful. "We'll figure this out," she said. "But for now, just knowing you understand me is enough." I nodded, my chest full, my mind clearer. The tension hadn't vanished, but it had transformed, no longer chaotic, but patient, promising. We had a connection, undeniable and deep, but one we could navigate responsibly, with respect for everyone involved. The next evening, the house felt lighter somehow. The tension from the previous day had not vanished, but it had shifted, muted, patient, and tender. My girlfriend's sister greeted me with her usual calm smile, but there was a softness now, an unspoken acknowledgement of what had passed and what we had decided to protect. We spent the evening helping with small tasks, arranging flowers, setting the table, and laughing at tiny mishaps. Every time our hands brushed, it was electric yet gentle, a reminder of the closeness we had discovered without needing to say a word. Our shoulders occasionally touched as we moved around the room, each contact subtle but deliberate, like silent reassurance. At one point, my girlfriend joined us, chatting animatedly about her day. I watched as her sister leaned slightly toward me while laughing, her hand grazing mine as she passed a plate. I felt a familiar warmth, but it was tempered by understanding and respect. The age gap, the history, the responsibility, it all mattered, yet it didn't diminish the quiet connection we shared. Later, we sat together on the couch, a soft blanket draped over our laps. The younger sister had gone to bed, leaving just the two of us again. This time, there was no urgent need to explain, no heightened heartbeat from a sudden gesture. Instead, we were simply present. Our knees brushed lightly, our hands occasionally met, and the room seemed to hold a gentle rhythm of comfort and familiarity. She rested her head lightly on my shoulder for a brief moment, a quiet gesture of trust and companionship. I felt her warmth, steady and grounding, and I realized that the fire between us didn't need to roar, it could glow steadily, quietly, in moments like this. There was no recklessness, only the promise of understanding and patience. When I left that night, she walked me to the door. Her hand brushed against mine one last time, fingers lingering just slightly, and she gave me a small, knowing smile. My chest tightened, not with longing alone, but with the contentment of a bond that had weathered tension and come through stronger. Walking to my car, I reflected on the delicate balance we had struck: respect, admiration, emotional honesty, and a spark that was ours alone. There was no rush, no expectation, just a connection that could grow naturally, slowly, beautifully.